from Digital Fifth. He's co-founder of that organization. It's a fintech consulting organization which is doing great in the industry. Second guest with me today is Mr. Anish. He's founder of Open. It's well known as neobank in the industry, and they are doing innovation in this space and leading in Indian space as well. So thanks for joining the discussion today. The topic which we are planning to cover today is on the APIs, how APIs plays a critical role in the fintech, and how API will define the future of fintech space in India. So to start with, Shashank will talk about Indian stack and different applications of the APIs which are there in the industry in India from the Indian context. And then then Anish basically will cover how actually a platform looks like and how they can enable those applications of APIs to a platform. So over to you, Shashank.
Thank you, Ashutosh, and thank you, NPCI, for this great initiative, and I'm honored to be part of this session. So, good afternoon, everyone. I can see some of the familiar names being in there. Good to see most of you, my friends, there on the platform, and it's good to be sharing the platform along with Anish to talk about it. So this particular area I'm going to talk about that how India's stack portion has evolved around the APIs and how it's contributed to the lots of innovation in the industry. So to start with the sessions, I just want to give a background about that entire the API layering which has happened. It's promoted over the innovation. So before getting into the India stack, how the layering structure has worked. So primarily, if you see in the country specification, be it in India, be across any other globe, you will see that the government technologies have already been laid down, be it in the taste of the global positioning system or the setting out the spectrum, telecom spectrum for the industry to consume. And then on top of that, the industry players have built their own kind of on a layer, like say, for example, Google Maps. So on that same, the Google Maps on internet layer has been built. And then another layer was created where the smartphone players, the Android OS, Android and iOS, the kind of the platform was created, and that layer was created. And then payment structure was created where the Visa and the Master, the railroad was created, and the bank ecosystem came into play. So this entire layer, the government, then industry player and the telecom player and the payment player, when it's stacked together, it's given birth to the lots of innovations, be it talk about Amazon or the Uber or Airbnb. And similar all sort of examples that we can talk about it. And there is an API structure is behind, because entire structure has been built in such a way that it can be structured in the APIs and people can consume that services. Taking that same stack layer into forward, the India stack was created. India stack is nothing but as a name has been given to the various kind of a functionality which was introduced in India, primarily from the push from the government. So that's why the name has come as an India stack. So since the government infrastructure was put in place, the ecosystem was put in place, and entirely this ecosystem was put in place in the API structure. So, so all the functionality which has been put in place as a part of the India stack, you can see, and I'll just go into little deep. It's be backed by the API structure. The first most in the India stack layer, if you see, and this whole entire stack, when we'll cover and we'll see that how it has given a birth to lots of innovation, lots of the different business model, the business applications, and in fact that has been one of the key contributor behind the emergence of the fintechs and the startup ecosystem in India. So first was the foremost layer comes into that the presence-less layer, which is nothing backed by the Aadhaar. So authenticating any individual that who you are without being physically present, by confirming that, okay, this is Shashank Shekhar, by just confirming my Aadhaar number from the UIDA by just one simple API call. That's why being provided as a presence-less layer. Be it you authenticate myself through the OTP or using my biometric, that's what the purpose was, that you don't need to be physically present to authenticate yourself. That was completely presence-less layer, and it was built in the structure of the Aadhaar. Now, when this structure was created as a presence layer, that gave a birth to the lots of the use cases, which finally converted into the paperless layer. So, what was the paperless layer? It was talking about that doing any actions with respect to any individual as a part of the financial services or as is a part of the government initiative or any kind of the services, authenticate as an individual actions that can be taken care as a paperless. And some of the use cases came as like one is that eKYC, then second was the e-sign and the DigiLocker. Now, what is eKYC? What is eKYC? So many of the banking's parlance, you will talk about it. Then you want to consume any services, even in the telecom, wherever you need to do the know your customer. So normally know your customers being done through that one, you need to be individually present and then provide your identity card or the address proof. This layer try to do that same thing using the APIs powered by the Aadhaar to authenticate yourself as well as your address through the Aadhaars. That's was primarily discovered as the eKYC. Now the regulations has changed multiple times. When it was allowed the eKYC, then Supreme Court judgment come, and that was then again regulation came that okay you can use it but without making mandatory. But still now it has come into the new avatar is a video KYC where again you can do the face-to-face interaction and do the validation of individuals using the Aadhaar. So it's again back in the force, and it has really turned around the entire the ecosystems, lots of business model around it. Next most important actions come as the e-sign. Now, what happened that whenever you do any kind of services with the any party, be it banks, be it insurance, there is a normally concept of the contract signing. Now, normally contract signing is done through the wet signature, and wet signature required you to be physically present. So you do the physical signature, and then papers being taken care by both the parties as a record, as any evidence, and managing that physical document. That's the entire thing was replaced by using the concept e-sign. So whatever the contract that you want to do between the two party, you can authenticate that document using the e-sign, using again as an Aadhaar authentication through the API layer. So you can do the signing of the contract. And next important layer was created the DigiLocker. So DigiLocker is primarily nothing but as a kind of the government infrastructure which has been provided by government and been suggested that okay, any Indian citizens may have the various documents as a record that they maintain, be it from your birth certificate to the college passing, school passing certificates, then your income tax, your home agreement, lots of documentation that you maintain. And normally these documentation are maintained as a physical documents in your normally safe and all these things. What government is trying to do that you have the DigiLocker and you can digitize all the documents and put it that document. It doesn't leave there as just a record storage kind of things. The use cases goes beyond that. So any third party which required your document access as a part of providing the services, like the case of the banks, like banks normally want to see your home agreement before issuing the loan to you. Now normally you will have to submit the physical document. What it does that okay, you give me banks will ask you to give me access to your DigiLocker. I will go and pick up the your home agreement from the DigiLocker and I will use for the purpose of the verification. So that the entire DigiLocker was created to store the document and make the document available to any third party, again using the Aadhaar authentication. So control remain always with you. So in the entire, all the three layers, be it providing your eKYC, you're doing the e-sign or the DigiLocker, the control is in the individual hand using providing the consent, authorizing them all these process using the Aadhaar. Now just very to give you that how the massive it has become in the now terms of the number, like we all know that almost 95% of the citizens are having the Aadhaar, like 1.25. But you know what is the authentication has been done? So almost like 43 billion of authentication has been done. I mean, per average, like one Aadhaar, 40 times the authentication has been performed. Almost 8 billion eKYC has already been done. And the DigiLocker, now the usage has to still increase. It will start increasing because in the January itself, the RBI has allowed the fintechs and the NBFCs to start doing the document verification using the DigiLocker. So that's also going to be big steps. So currently, still the 40 million citizens have registered themselves on DigiLocker, but I think that's number going to increase because more and more use cases will come, the more uses will increase. So that's the entire again paperless was created using the APIs of Aadhaar to facilitate the various functions. Then came the cashless layer. Again, before that cashless layer came into where that various payment services were provided by the NPCI, be it UPI, be it IMPS, be it the AEPS. All these services, if you look at it, comes from the very fundamental concept of the having the API structure. Before that, India had already various other payment infrastructure, be it NEFT or the RTGS in place. But the IMPS, when it was launched, it completely turned around the payment landscape in the country, where it's pushed for the payments 24 by 7 on an instant basis, and that instant payment can happen only when this was introduced as an API structure itself. The first time any payment in India was introduced in the form of API, it was IMPS. Then extending the IMPS functionality for further, it came the AEPS. Again, AEPS Aadhaar enabled payment system, which has the two backbone. One is the making the payment services, but the second layer was using the entire the Aadhaar authentication infrastructure in place. Because many of the citizens have now their accounts mapped to Aadhaar. Now, many of the citizens, especially in the rural areas, as well as the remote villages, are also seeing where they don't have the access to the ATM infrastructure or the branch infrastructure, how they can access the banking financial services using the normal thumbprint on the Aadhaar enabled devices and can perform the banking services. So that's the AEPS was introduced. And again, it was completely on the API layer, one side using the Aadhaar APIs and second on the entire the payment APIs on the platform. And then came the big things on the UPI, which is was completely changed the payment landscape, because first time it was introduced as a four-party kind of a concept. Like being on any platforms, I can access my any of the banks and can perform the banking services. In fact, you can call it that UPI is was one of the big use cases about the API enabled banking or the open banking. Because traditionally, if you look at it, when you want to access the banking services, you need to go to the any individual bank application, be it mobile banking or the internet banking. Here, it allows you to access your bank, any of the bank accounts from one single platform. So in the Google Pay, if you go, or the Phone Pay you go, or the Bhim app, you can access all your bank accounts and you can do the transactions. So that's the cashless layer was introduced. Then came the consent layer. Now it took quite time to consent layer to evolve. I will be talking shortly on the account consent layer, but that was quite delayed, where that now it was introduced, that consent layer primarily through the account aggregator model, the Samati that you call it, like how I manage the consent of an individual to provide us to get his access to his data and allow the services to him. So I'll just covering in the details. So that's one layer. Now it's checking its shape, while the other three layers of the presenceless, paperless, and cashless has already taken a form. And just try to see that how does it has start impacting the entire innovation landscape. So look at that. When you talk about the digital lending in the last 5 or 6 years, when you talk about the lending has quietly big influence by the entire the India stack layer. Again, the use of the APIs. Uh, Earlier, it was used to be a very traditional process through the banks and the NBFC, but with the advent of the India stack and the entire API structure provided by the various other ecosystem players, the entire the lending has started taking shape in the form of the complete digitization. I'm not going to the any individual product, but any typical life cycle. If you look at it, the loan cycle and see that how the each individual layer are trying to influence that. So first player is step itself when you are trying to onboard the customer. So trying to do the complete it's eKYC. Now you can do it through the Aadhaar OTP or through the biometrics. You can completely do the verification without customer being the physical presence. Then you can do the credit bureau check. Also, the lots of API structure has come into the place. Like rather than logging into the civil site and downloading it, you can directly make an API call and get the credit score for any individual. Then you complete the credit underwriting process, and when the loan is ready to be disbursed and you have already approved, then comes the process of the signing the contract. And earlier it used to get, whenever the loan agreement has to be signed, the customer has to be either physically present in the bank branch or the NBFC branch, or the sales guy has to visit the customer place. Now it doesn't require. You send the customer the loan document, and customer can sign that agreement using the e-sign. So again, here the paperless infrastructure coming into place, signing the document through the digitally for the loan agreement. Then the process of automated fee collection. So you can make a UPI call to do the advanced payment EMI collections is required. Or now you want to sign a mandate, then you do a complete e-natch. So e-natch is a electronic natch which completely replaces the physical mandate process. Now you can do the e-natch again through the e-sign process, Earlier, it was again discontinued for some time, but now again it has been allowed by the regulator to start using the e-natch, using the e-sign process. So again, here that the paperless layer came into the process. And once the entire you have signed the contract, then you do the stamp, do the disbursements. Now come the disbursement. So earlier it used to be process that you either have to do the NEFT or the RTGS, and it used to be the batch process. Now the concept comes like whenever loan has been signed, immediately instant you get that money into your account, primarily through the AMPS and the UPI. Yes, if it's a large amount, more than 2 lakhs and all these things, still it goes through process. But if you say the digital lending primarily try to cater to the smaller amount of the loan. So it's IMPS and the UPI is prominently being used again in this process. And you see the collection and monitoring. So you can see that entire in this process flow, how the entire that process has been influenced by this entire India stack and the APIs structure. I'll just quickly try to complete on the other of the case here. This is the digital bank, the Genesis. It's a big use case when you call about the API structure in place. When the demonetization is announced, within 100 days, you can see that Kotak launching 811. If not 811, India Stack eKYC API is there and all the other services available through the APIs, it might not have seen the in the physical presence. So that's been the root cause that eKYC layer infrastructure in being in place, which allowed both Kotak and the DZ Bank to immediately start the onboarding process without being physically present to the customer. So that was the big use case which happened through the eKYC and the entire API stack. Then now the big piece is coming as an account aggregator. So this is where that in the 2016 government allowed that formation of account aggregator, which is nothing but a third intermediary layer, which connects with the various financial services, be it banks, be it mutual fund agencies, be it insurance company, and then these are the like where the customers' data are being held. Now the challenge many a times happen that whenever you want to go to any banks or any where and apply for the loan or any other financial services, that third party required an access to your various financial data, be it bank statement or be it any other forms, and then you need to reach out to the respective bodies and get the data. Here that is trying to simplify that entire process by putting that intermediary layer, okay, and any other third financial information user, which called a FIU, want to provide the services to the customer using this concept from the account aggregator layer, get that access to your customer data and then passing into the FIU. So that the intermediary layer has been put in place. But more importantly, the consent layer was introduced into this picture. So today, if you want to access any individual customer data, account aggregator will fetch the data only on basis of the consent that you provide on that infrastructure. And each consent will be mapped to your that particular use case. Let's say, for example, you want to reach out to any third party and want to apply for a student loan, then only that use case being considered as a part of your consent, and the entire data, when it will be fetched, it will be used for that same purpose. You will be in complete control of your consent. Like you can withdraw the consent anytime. You can give the consent to the other parties again based on the different use cases. So that's kind of intermediate layer was created. The more importantly, this account aggregator layer, if you talk about, is primarily just a layer. It's a data blank. So they are not going to store the data. They connect with the various financial information provider, be banks, and then pass on to the information to the third party. And they are not going to manage any data. They are not going to use this data. They are primarily going to pass through the data and manage the consent with respect to that use cases. So that's again going to be big. And this is one of the account aggregator models when, in the India context, when you talk about the API exchange and all these things. Always you struggle that there is no standard for the APIs in the country. So every banks, every fintechs, every individuals have their own way to define that APIs and the documentation. Account aggregator model is trying one step into the standardizing the whole process. So be it fetching the data from the financial information provider, and then the third party to consume the data from the provided by the account aggregators, all will be required to follow the standard APIs structure, which has been provided by the Rabbit, which is again a standard arm of the RBI for the technology. So that's why it's trying to promote lots of things, the consent infrastructure, the API standardization, and then lots of use cases we'll expect to see around that. So just quick, again, the UPI has enabled lots of, again, use cases, be it on the B2C segment or the B2B segment. I know, Shudha, so I'm just almost 1 or 2 minutes, so we're just completing that. So that's another use cases that we'll see, the merchant cash advance, which is again on the complete on the QR code model, which is again the UPI, which has again become a big use cases where you can extend the loans to any merchant based on the all the kind of transaction has been done on is this Bharat QR, which is a part of the UPI. So you have the visibility of the merchant transaction on the platforms. And you know the what kind of business is being done by that. So based on that business, what he does, you can extend as a short term loan and small loan to the merchant. And also you can do the entire collection mechanism also on the each of the UPI transactions. So that's the entire the B2B model is evolving around that. And B2C, we all see that what we are doing with Amazon Pay or the Google Pay and the Phone Pay. And the last one use case I'll talk about, that AEPS, that has played a big role, especially into the extending the financial services reach to the especially the remote areas. One of the like big use case come during this entire COVID lockdown periods when the government introduced that the extend the support for the financial support for the citizens. You don't have the ATMs and the banks were also not available. So how did that entire money able to reach to the customer? AEPS played the big role into that entire infrastructure. So that's why I'll just summarize that point, that the entire ecosystem of the government, which through the Aadhaar, through the NPCI, the payments infrastructure, and that RBI providing that consent infrastructure for the account aggregation. That's and entire this infrastructure is powered by the API structure. That's why it allows a lots of innovation to happen, and that will continue to see. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening out to me. Thanks, Asutosh, and I'll
Sure.
pass on to
Yeah.
Anish, and then at the end of the session, we'll be taking up the question up, right?
Questions after this. Yes. So I'll request everyone to put their questions on the chat or Q&A session, and we will take it after Anish's presentation. Over to you, Anish.
So Anish, I've provided that, right? Yeah.
Anish, you are on mute.
Yeah. Hi, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah, it is coming. Yeah, it has come.
Okay.
Please start.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashutosh and the NPCA team for organizing these wonderful sessions over the last, few weeks. And Shashank has actually given a very detailed overview of how the current, open banking ecosystem has actually evolved in India and what does it actually mean for us. Now, what I'm going to take you is like, what does this mean for fintechs, developers, and banks? Because last week I was actually speaking to a few of the bankers, and one of the questions which I always posed to them was like, what is the driving force for banks to adopt open banking? While there are like newer opportunities, while there is actually a regulatory support, and there are like some of the banks that has actually been pioneering on this side. But what is actually the reason why banks wanted to actually now extend their APIs for other fintechs to build services? And this question always also comes from fintechs. What does it take for me to make use of this APIs if I actually wanted to go live? So that's where I'll actually start with a brief about like how this has actually evolved globally in the last 3 4 years, and then what does fintechs and developer and even banks has to specifically look forward when it actually comes to taking this as a business model. Now, we all know that the platform as a business model has actually evolved over the last few decades. While in the earlier 70s, it was more focused on products. And when it comes to 80s, it was always a combination of a product for services. And in the 2000, we always seen with the web 1.0, just web 2.0, where it was more focused about you or the customer focus. And if you really look at today, right now, it's always like the platform as a business model, which has actually disrupted a lot of traditional models, whether it is in terms of ride sharing startups, or when it comes to OTT based streaming. We have actually seen that. But 3-4 years back, when we looked at on the financial services space, banks and the entire industry was faced with a lot of challenges. The cost of technology was increasing. We are actually sitting on legacy technology, which gives limited flexibility, and the ability to grow based on the current revenue, ability to grow with the current business models were always limited. And along with that, the interest rates are actually falling down, and the increased regulatory requirements actually put a lot of stress on in terms of the capitals and the margin. And this also, on the other side, there is actually a reduced entry barriers for new competitors, as well as non banking related players or fintechs. So then there are again like other factors. For example, for if typically like if for every service which a bank used to offer, or every feature that a bank used to offer, now we'll actually see a fintech which is actually building this as a use case. For example, if a bank is offering a pay later as a one of the features of maybe its payment suite or a savings account, now there would be like a player who's actually focused only on pay later, and that's actually happening across most of the services. And while all of this was happening, on the other side, customers were demanding more delightful experiences in terms of the user experiences. They don't want to actually call up the call center for actually deactivating a card. They're actually looking for ongoing value. They wanted to actually access the services on the go, and they wanted services more personalized. So this actually is what which actually led to the evolution of this banking as a service model, and which is actually facilitated by the open banking. In many markets, it was, while it was driven by the regulations, but these are also the factors which from the pioneers in terms of the banking as a service providers, these are the factors which driven them to actually realize that the bank being a platform has its own value. So when the advantage of a banking as a service model is that it's still the bank itself still become the control point of the platform, because you own the platform and you can actually focus on your core competencies. Because when it comes to managing the customer deposits, the banking, the regulations, that's your core competence. And this also gives banks the opportunity to access new types of business models which otherwise we would not have imagined, where the new types of fintechs or the partners will be co-creating or like building new use cases on top of the platform. And then the platform itself has become a business model. We have actually seen that cases Europe and the US, typical examples like the Solaris Bank, where the it was actually focused only on banking as a service model, where it is actually powering other fintechs. It doesn't offer services directly to neither consumers, nor it doesn't offer services to the business customers, but only it works with partners, and their entire business model successfully have been built on this. Similar is the case with the CBW Bank in the US, which actually was taken over like one of the Indian founders like few in the early 2000s, and they completely transformed this into an API banking play, where they were actually powering some of the fintechs like the Simple, even the some of the blockchain based money transfer services initially, and that actually be able to build a successful model around it. So we actually seen like, and these banks didn't got into it not just because of regulation, because they truly believe that there is a business model of being a platform or a banking as a service model, right? And this definitely helps the banks to increase the customer base through the partners. We have actually seen that in India as well. When phone pay or a Google Pay acquires the customers, it's actually benefiting the sponsor bank or the bank which is actually powering them on the back end. And as I mentioned earlier, it also leads to co-creating of new products, and we have seen that in case of lending is the best example, where we're actually seeing the model of the FLDG model, where the fintechs, the NBFCs, and banks are actually coming together to create new business model. And then the cost of operations and the distribution, it increases your margins. Typically, for a current account, customer acquisition, the cost was somewhere around 6,000, which we all know, right? So now, especially when there is a partner which is actually distributing and taking care of the customer acquisition, we can actually, that adds up to the margins. And there are multiple business models which banks are following globally on this. While apart from the traditional, revenue from the deposits and the interest and the interchange revenue, the business models are also based on the platform fee, the API usage fee, and these are some of the models which some of the players have deployed. Now, what does it mean for a fintech or a bank? While we have actually seen that how our ecosystem has evolved in India when it comes to India stack, when it comes to the set of APIs that has been there. We have actually seen a couple of success models on services being built on the API side, like the UPI. But still, while I'm pretty much confident that the regulator, the banks, and the entire ecosystem is driving a lot of initiatives and moving at a very fast pace when it comes to the open banking as a what do you call as a as an ecosystem. But there are like few things which I've always felt as looking from a fintech perspective, that which is actually missing onto this. And many times, like a lot of fintech founders also or developers keep asking to coming keep asking about, like, what does it take for me to actually utilize this APIs? Maybe a larger player like Google Pay or a Phone Pay or some of the startups, they may have access to a bank and build their services. Why is it, while we are talking about democratization of the open banking, why is that I'm not able to actually go and sign up on developer portal of the bank, generate the sandbox credential within 30 seconds, and then able to build my services? So these are a few considerations which I thought, like, which will be helpful for the fintechs and the developers and some of the banks which is actually working on this part. And the primary thing is, like, the important thing for this is the API sandbox. And we all know, like, in the last 10 years, the biggest disruption in the payment gateway space was Stripe, which started out probably in the 2012 2013. And the biggest driving factor for Stripe was, like, they were actually built this platform focused on the developer first, because payment gateways always used to exist for at least for the last 10-15 years in the market. But what disrupted Stripe was that the focus on the developers. And so the tip, they actually made it like do it yourself, where the developer actually can come in, generate the sandbox credentials, well defined documentation, they can actually interactive Swagger environments where they can actually test this using the things, so that, like, he or she doesn't have to wait for the compliance approval or the business agreements to come to get the sandbox credentials. They made it like a do it yourself. And that's what's the same thing which is actually happening for most successful API banking platforms globally as well. So while at some point of time, when personally, when we are actually looking at integrating some of the banking APIs from outside, typically from our experience from India is that it take anywhere between, like, easily 4 months to 12 months basically for new bank to go live, or for any fintech, depending on the services. Maybe there are like certain services which are now standardized, like, for example, in a UPI and all, you can actually probably go much faster. But generally what we have seen is this is actually the timeline that is actually required. Whereas when we actually looked at the some of the international markets, there are like certain cases where we're able to actually go live within few weeks of, like, getting the APIs. So we don't have a dependency for the developers doesn't have a dependency on the business teams or the compliance teams to waiting for the API credentials. They go to the do-it-yourself platform, get the generate the API keys, integrate, while the business teams and the compliance and the other process can happen in parallel. So this is actually one critical thing which is important. And I know that we all know that in India at this time, like last 2 years, we have a lot of financial institutions which has actually built good developer platforms. Like the RBL was one of the pioneers. We have that Edge Bank, ICICI Bank. But what I still feel is that one aspect that we all need to look at is, like, even in all of the scenarios, can I, as a developer, actually go and generate the sandbox credentials and build at least a POC on the UAT environment, at least to I may be wrong. Basically, in the last 6 months, probably we not looked at, but at least my belief is that unless you actually get into a business agreement and the compliance approval, most of the times you don't get the UAT credential, and that delays at least the 3 to 4 months, because you are actually waiting for the 3 4 months for your POC to be built. So this is one part where definitely banks and even platforms like payment platforms like NPZ are actually working on. So that's a good part. Good news is that okay, the banks are now working towards it, and platforms like NPZ are working on to it. But this is also something which a fintech should actually know about, like when you are actually approaching a particular partner for getting an API access. The second important thing is like, while there is always when we talk about open banking or API banking or payment APIs, we all see that okay, I have the APIs. But now the biggest question is that for a fintech or a developer, you would always want the APIs to be flexible or to suit your business model or your product flow. Maybe you may have defined the product in a particular way wherein you wanted to actually, just I can take an example of neobank. So for example, like today, if I'm going to build a consumer neobank, my expectation would be that okay, the customer actually comes to my, downloads the app, he fills up the eKYC, he fills up the documentation, and then without going away from the app, he should be able to get the current account and see the balances and start transacting. But then when you're actually approaching a bank, like the first thing that you need to also look, this both from the bank's perspective and from a fintech's perspective. But right now, from a fintech's perspective, when you approach a bank, does your partner bank who is actually offering you APIs support this business model? If your business model is such that okay, the eKYC process starts and then he has to again log in back to the bank's internet banking platform to authenticate it and come back, that's actually a broken experience, right? So then does the API support your end-to-end use cases? Maybe account opening is just one part of it, but once you are actually building this application, you may wanted to enable that customer to do payouts to IMPS or NEFT or other channels. If that API is not there, you are again stuck. So these are like few considerations when you are actually approaching partner bank. And it's also more for banks that okay, this is also things like if this is streamlined, this can actually help the banks to really fast forward and make use of the banking as a service opportunity. The other part, where we have actually seen the delay to go to market, especially from a fintech perspective, is that while we have now standardized protocols in terms of the APIs and the authentication, there could be certain services where you may really need to actually think about working towards the compliance much in advance. For example, if you're actually working on maybe a card issuance based service, or if you're actually working on a payment processing things, and if you're storing the card details, you don't want it to actually get into the last level and the banks asking for you for do you have a PCI DSS compliance, and then you actually start working towards the compliance, finding an QSA or an auditor, and then making towards that. So while actually planning for the in the initial phase itself, if it is actually ready, it actually helps a lot in terms of the compliance. And then comes the information security management. If you're already like taking care of that, whenever the bank actually does an audit basically before going live, it actually saves a lot of this time, because most of the times what I have seen is like there are cases where we have personally I had seen like the integration is done, the UAT environment is done, but when it comes to the compliance part, the first time there is actually a few observations that actually came from the auditor, and then again to bring that auditor back for doing the audit, it may take 3 months or 4 months, and you're actually losing out. And especially when you are in a fintech, the time is actually the essence. So why at the same time in which you're actually making use of the APIs, trying to taking care of the compliance internally will actually help a lot. The other important part is there is a always a sharp difference between the UAT environment and the production environment, which majority of the services where this is not generalized, this is not common, but we have actually seen that, and it would have an complete the impact on your go-to market. So you're actually gone through the process of going to a UAT environment, integrating your application, got the compliance approval, you have the business approvals, you have the agreements. in place, and now when you get the production credentials and the way in which the API is structured is different from what it was earlier, that would actually that actually would again like delay your go to market. Obviously, like as Shashank mentioned, as we are actually seeing there's a lot of standardization that is happening in the API, so it's actually again like on a positive side it's moving, but there could be certain APIs which may not be fully, it could be maybe like a not directly related to what the set of this standard APIs are. So if there is actually a when a bank is actually looking at like the end-to-end journey of a fintech coming to my BaaS platform and going live, if all of these points has been actually taken care, including the standardization of the production environment or the APIs compared with the UAT environments, in terms of like giving the uh, giving the making the UAT environment available, making the processes streamlined in terms of like the documentation and the legal agreement, that would actually help a lot for the fintechs and even the banks. So I actually this is from my end. I generally wanted to talk from the other side on how, while this is evolving on from a industry level, from a ecosystem level, these are like this the other part of this, where is actually the front end facing part of like building applications on making use of this API banking. These are few things which I felt would be important for fintechs and the bank.
Great. Thanks, Anish, and thanks, Ashank. I think let's start with the questionnaires. So, before that, I just want to cover a few aspects that people are asking where they can test the APIs. So, we want to inform that we have a portal live right now where developers can come and test the API related to NPCI and few more organizations which have listed their API products. We are coming with more API products soon in that platform. So I have put the link in the chat session. They can come there and they can reach out to us also at innovations@npci.org.in. So fintechs, we are very much open to support fintechs, and we can assist them at any point. So thanks for that. So Anish, first question I will start with you because people are asking about how they can test your M Shop feature. So can you just cover that first? There's a question asked on your M Shop feature, how they can test it. If there's a sandbox you have where they can go and test uh, your M Shop feature. Anish, you're on mute.
Ashutosh, I didn't understand the M shop part. What does it?
Okay. So I thought there's some API of yours where people want to. Okay. So we'll discuss that. I think I'll ask the uh, participant to reframe the question and ask it again. But there's an important question which I want to ask both you and Sashank, that banks are still closed. There's a question from Shravan that banks are still closed about sharing their APIs with the startups. So how they are seeing it's opening up from the open banking push, and can you just share the good some of the banks which are assisting these fintechs to come up with a platform? So,
So I'll go and so I can go from the banking side and Anish can go from the consumer side.
yeah,
I think it's Indian banking ecosystem. If you see, started evolving a long time back with the Yes Bank and RBL taking the lead. Or it was from the payment side and some areas. But if you see in the today's context, quite a lot player have started opening up their APIs. And since as Anish spoke about, lots of evolution has happened in terms of the security and the compliance, so that you can take care of the thing. So bank has deployed the right set of the technologies, and many of the other banks, apart from the Yes and DCB Bank is one case. ICICI has recently, now ICICI has already been there with their set of the APIs available in the market, but recently they have announced their developer portal. Another smaller banks also coming into the foray, with be it Federal, be it Zivan. So lots of the bank has started opening up their stack of the APIs, and they are willing to work with the fintechs to start building on the new business model and new like Bank Open is a classic case where the Anish has worked out in the participation in the bank, where it's a classic like any SME or MSME can do the banking transaction, entire access this bank statement, the transactions from the third party platforms, that, which is nothing but the accounting platform. So banks have started opening up the APIs, and we'll see the couple of more years. I think we're gonna see more or more banks coming to the foray.
Your views on that?
Yeah, so agree with Shashank, and for all of us in the initial years of being a developer or being a fintech, it has always been RBL and Yes Bank when it comes to whenever I think about API banking, they were the banks which actually started. And ICICI for the last 2-3 years have done a commendable job in terms of exposing their APIs, bringing in more fintech partners. It has also got a developer platform, and banks like Federal in the south are now very aggressively moving towards it. And as we speak, so the good part is like I can actually see like banks like Axis, HDFC, Kotak, all of them now putting a lot of initiatives basically when it comes to API banking. So generally, like all the 12, 13 banks, the major banks, because already have at least a team or like working towards it, and we are seeing more smaller banks, even some of the small finance bank has been trying to become very aggressive when it comes to API bank.
And just to add to that point, so you guys can refer to that Infinite site which Ashutosh has released, which also lists down various of the APIs which has been released by the banks on this platform.
Yeah. So they can come and they can reach out to us, any of us, and we will provide any kind of support which they need to test the API. So I think what I'm seeing from the market is like they need a platform where they can come and at least test their products to start with before reaching out to the big banks. And I think there's a need of a platform and marketplace where they can come and test. So what are the trends which you see? So there's a question on um, how these fintechs are leveraging account aggregator. So account aggregator service is there. Yes, we understand that. How fintechs are making use of it and launching new use cases around it.
I think, of course, if you can repeat your question, because there was a lots of noise from the background.
So what I'm saying is like account aggregators come up as you pointed out also that account aggregator is a future of fintech industry. Can you just give some of the examples in the real life now, real space in the fintech industry where they have leveraged these account aggregator services and solved some of the business problems, especially in the COVID times, something like that.
So first thing first, I think account aggregator has yet to see that now the license has been given and the work is going on. So be it the camps or the FinView, the couple of guys have already started, but has not gone live yet on the account aggregator per se, if you look at it. So that infrastructure, the license and the infrastructure setting is being done. We are expected that maybe by September or October that at least one account aggregator will live. And it's not easy also because many of the banks also or the financial institutions also have to get ready to open their APIs for the account aggregator to consume. As we were talking the earlier question, that is still not all the banks have become ready. So that's going to happen. But some of the use cases are expected to happen. Definitely, the lending is big thing that which is going to take advantage of it because you will have the complete visibility of the finances of the individual. And since the account aggregator will also have the data from coming from the various other government institutions like GST and all, you can have the better visibility on the individual financial and the business health. Then other couple of areas is like personal finance management, like health, wealth management, and all these things. So that will happen. But as it has happened that we have seen in the earlier initiative, be it on the Aadhaar, be it on the UPI, market takes it takes times to when the to come out with the new innovations and so moment that account aggregator comes into the existence and the business starts, we'll see lots more use cases coming up. But still, we have to wait for that day to happen.
Okay.
Um,
Hi, Shashank. Ashutosh, sorry. I have a sort of a follow-up question on account aggregators. Do you think in its current shape and form, the account aggregator system, it's going to be successful? Because honestly, there seems to be no incentive for FIPs, especially large banks and other FIs to come on board. Why would a large bank readily share its customer data on an ecosystem like this? If there's any service which is to be provided to a customer, the bank can provide it itself. It will never look to expose data to third parties and let their customers go to different financial services provider?
Okay, so I'll make an attempt. You're right. So that's definitely going to be a constraint. In the UK, also, when the government now pushed the UK open banking, still there was a resistance. And since it was regulation, the many guys have to come into play. But if you look at the account aggregator in India and where the market has already started evolving in the open banking, that will have lots of influence on the account aggregator. People will see that benefits is coming out. People are seeing the benefit of the collaborating with the fintechs, building out the new business use cases. Even the large banks also they are working with the fintechs. They are ready to share the data. Now it's in the close loop with that individual fintech, but still the large banks are working very closely with the fintechs and the startups to evolve. So that's also is going to happen. Yes, it may take time. That's for sure. It may also need happen that government may start pushing out. RBI may come as a push also. That may also happen. But I think market will keep these guys. Like you can look at the classic case again. I'll talk about it. When the many of the large banks started seeing that they launched their app, but they started seeing that they may be completely left out when the Google Pay and the Phone Pay started playing. But still, they gone and partner with these guys, and they completely gone in the back end when it comes to the UPI. None of the you don't see the bank any other bank UPI app today, but still they are in the back end. So that's will happen. The market will evolve, market will define, and large bank also will continue to participate when they see the value into that.
Yeah, I think that perfectly answers it because it totally depends on market how it take it up, and all the regulations around it will definitely help in defining the scope of accounting. So Anish, my question to you is on the open banking and neo banking. So people have asked very generic questions. We tried to cover everyone, but can you just cover on your journey to become like a and work like a neo bank? How it is different from normal banking, and what are the additional things which you can target which a bank can't offer? So if you can cover something on that.
Sure. So we started out with this idea 3 years because primarily dealing with a lot of the small businesses. One thing which we realized was that there is a lot of gaps when it comes to business banking. Like a typical business owner has to actually struggle when it comes to tracking cash flows. He has to deal with other interfaces like a separate payment gateway dashboard, a separate invoicing dashboard. Payouts were always not easier for a small business, while transactional banking services were focused on the mid SMEs to the large enterprises. And all of these processes of lead to a lot of the time and energy of the finance teams and the entrepreneurs spending on the reconciliation and managing his banking and finance, which is taking away his time, right? So we thought like if we can actually have a bank account which can automate the entire finance for a small business, because technically your bank account is where all the inflow happens, and that's where the outflow of the money also happen. And I can actually, if I can track that the 100 rupees coming to my bank account is from Shashank, and for a invoice payment for a freelancer contract, and the 10 rupees I'm paying to Ashutosh is for salary, I can probably automate income and expenses. Now, we realize that banks are focused on banking. They will not be able to focus more on the other aspects as well. Other aspects like the reconciliation aspects, or the accounting related aspects, or the invoicing aspects. So, and we also looked at internationally in the international markets, especially the European and the US market. We found that there are fintechs actually who are able to collaborate with the banks to build this friend-end applications, which in tie in very well with the business account to help a business automate their finances. And that's what the initial thought process, Tom. Why can't we actually build that as a neobank in India? That's how initially we found out what the neobanking model exists. Now, when it comes to the difference, what we bring is like while we use the bank as a backend for the entire banking services, we created the front end experiences as well as the adding value to the customers in terms of automating his entire reconciliation, automate ability to connect his banking services with multiple third party applications, bringing all his financial suite of services together. So this is what it has been worked for us, or I mean in our journey, especially with as a neobank.
Great, thanks for answering, and it will help other fintechs to take inspiration and do some activities around it. Sashank, my question to you is on there's a question which has been asked on fintech for investment banking. So, can you just give your views that any use case which has been just solved by for the investment banking by fintech? any use case with?
When you talk about the investment banking, more from the wealth perspective, I think that's one area you have to see the kind of the traction that the lending and the payments have seen. That's definitely. But that's lots more still happening. Lots of use cases are evolving. Some of the guys like Zerodha and all these things, apart from which has really made a big name into that entire space. While there are lots more other good use cases are also building up. And definitely account aggregator also could be one of the big things into the complete personal financial management. You will see lots more use cases coming up.
Great. There's a question which comes in my mind. Like you talked about four different layers in India stack. Um, do you see a need of another layer which is missing in this, or do you think that this is comprehensive and uh, it requires just the more players come into the space and start providing services?
So I'll make an attempt, I think, and Anish may add into that. So if you look at the India stack, Ashutosh, primarily still it's very much towards the individuals in the retail segment. If you look at it, I think there is a big space left out on the for the SME and MSME segment. How to cater to that segment? In fact, there was already some thoughts was going on to building that similar to India stack, like another stack called Sahai, which is still has to see that evolution to happen. But that's one area where how do you do the authentication of the individuals, SME, sole proprietor, MSME, and all these things? So what about the data of this business side of it? So that's one area that we see, and that definitely the big thing will happen, which will be able to cater to the MSME and SME segment.
So Anish, I'll add on the question so you can answer on the SME part. So that's why I just want to add the question next to it, that how MSME banking, corporate banking, uh, cooperative banks actually can come and leverage this technology and get more ready with their own guards around it.
Right. So in the MSME segment, not only on cooperative banks, even with the existing banks, I think the way in which we used to think about banking for the MSMEs have evolved a lot. And what we're actually seeing globally is that now customers wanted to actually bring banking into their existing business workflows. For example, if somebody is using a accounting software, he doesn't want to go back to an internet banking platform and then do the payments and come back and reconcile as well. So that is one thing. And secondly, when it comes to the cooperative segment, cooperative banks, especially by bringing in this type of digitalization, and especially at the post COVID times when every small business is actually looking at like going digital, this can not only help in terms of adding value and acquiring customers, but in terms of creating new products or business models. Because when you actually have access not only to the bureau scores and the statement and the balances, but you also have access to his pattern of his account receivables, his payables, his accounting data, that can lead to new models in terms of like giving on the lending side. Similarly, when it comes to doing wealth, I mean, we all know like in the current account space, because of the whatever the current regulations, we can't offer interest back to the customers, but we have seen like a huge amount of like money that is actually lying idle, and especially for the smaller retailers and on the MSMEs, can we actually identify that, okay, you have like 50,000 rupees that is actually idle, can you actually help them with wealth management as well? So these are like the newer opportunities on this MSME segment, which can be driven through the cooperative societies and cooperative banks, because they have access to the last mile of these customers.
So just I think you can answer the same question. There's a question asked by Kumar Shankar that flow-based lending is a new thing which is coming up. So he's asking on the points like GSTN data or your own transaction data, how can a neobank or a company like Open can enable those things?
Right. Yeah, in fact, we are already working on some of these initiatives for the last 6 to 8 months, especially in terms of using the not only the bank and the bureau score data, but alternative data like GSTN, as well as the other data points like the account payable, receivable data, your tally data, your balance sheet data on a real-time basis. Not only in terms of like working with the NBFCs and the banks to offer lending to the customers, but what after the lending can we also use that to see the health of the customer whom you actually lend. For example, if his account receivables has been getting delayed, and then you know that okay, there is actually a possible signal of like him defaulting basically as well. So this definitely neobanks and other fintechs can it's a larger opportunity how to actually innovate on this space, and it can definitely make it easier. It will also benefit the MSMEs as well, because they will be able to get better access to credit because of this additional data.
Thanks for it. So, Sashank, last question from my side to you.
Yes.
What are the few takes which you are? So, I assume that this COVID will take some more months to come up and recover the industry. So, what are your key takeaways for the fintech industry, and what are the key use cases which people can look upon and try to solve during this time?
So I think I've already earlier also spoken about on the same that COVID has been a good opportunity now in the negative form, but definitely is given an opportunity for the banks and the fintechs again to look at the partnership model. Because bank has also realized that there are lots more things has to be digitized at their end, while the fintech has an edge in terms of the technology. So there is a lots of opportunity for the collaboration, and banks are also looking to reach out to the various fintechs to start doing the tie-up, be it in the space of the lending or the or into the liabilities space, especially to more customer acquisition for the saving account, the current accounts. Now the video KYC is definitely enabling that process. So lots of more collaboration will happen. Second is also about the cost, because now you are not physically present. Lots of cost pressure is gonna come. So how you both fintechs on the other side definitely is under huge pressure on the cost. So how the both come together, build a new product and the solution, take each other's strength and reach out to the market. So that's gonna see we're gonna see more the collaboration and partnership, and that's a key for the future.
Anish, your views, if you were lines.
Yeah, I think while Shashank has mentioned about how COVID is actually becoming a good opportunity at the fintechs, one specific things we have actually seen is like there's also seen as a time where banks are actually trying to strengthen their platforms and planning for their products. So there's also a good opportunity for even fintechs who is actually working towards the banks, especially in the enterprise size, to approach them, because most of the banks which we are actually seeing is like they're actually planning for the next 5 to 6 months in terms of like building up, renovating their platform, creating new business model to support the COVID, or the opportunities as well. And definitely, as you said, like all the what we have specifically seen is that tier 2, tier 3 base of MSMEs are now trying to adopt digital. Everybody is now looking for integrating payments. They're looking for automating payouts. They're trying to actually reduce the, going to a physical branch. So those fintechs which actually focus on this side, it's a huge opportunities. When we had seen like at least 100x times, 10x jump in terms of the number of inquiries people are actually coming from the tier 2, tier 3 cities.
Great. I think even the tier 2 and tier 3 are adopting the fintechs very well. And that's a good opportunity for all the fintechs to come and try their products with the banks, with the payment rails like us, and roll out their products to the large mass. Thanks, Sashank. Thanks, Anish, for joining the call.
Thank
And
you very much.
it's a great informative session. And for the benefit of everyone, this video is already available in YouTube. You can go and watch it again and reach out to us at innovations@npci.org.in. We will try to solve the other queries which you have. Thanks for the day. Thank you and have a nice weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashutosh.
Thank you very
Thanks.
much. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.